All right, so we have our static advertisement, but we want to add some motion to it. We want to make this animated. So to do this, we have to work within the timeline here. And there's a couple things to know about the timeline and how Animate works with time and motion. So this particular document is an FPS at 30. That's 30 frames per second. Frames per second means exactly what you think it does. So we have our 1 second marker right here in the timeline, and you can see that that is 30 frames. If we change this to something like 20 frames per second for the document, then the 1 second marker shows up at the 20th frame. So this all depends on kind of how smooth you want the animation to be. I'm going to keep it at 30. So our 1 second is going to be at 30 frames per second. Of course, this is sort of like the end of our kind of animation here. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is decide how long I want this animation to be. So if I highlight all three of the frames, of the layer frames, at the 1 second marker, and then go ahead and hold down on this little icon here, I can choose to insert keyframes, blank keyframes, or frames. If I insert frames, it's going to extend my timeline out to the 1 second mark. And if we hit play here, we can see that's as long as it takes to get to 1 second. So maybe I'll actually make this a 2 second animation. So scrolling over, I can see the 2 second marker at 60 frames. I'm going to highlight those again. And once again, insert frame to go to 60 frames. So since this is going to be a 2 second animation, I now need to decide how I want to animate some of these things. So my background element is a simple shape. And a shape, I'm going to want to, and before I do any of this, I need to unlock my layers. So if I select that shape, I want to go ahead and use what's known as a shape tween to actually animate this shape. And to do that, I am going to go to the end, the 2 second mark, and on the last frame, I want to insert a keyframe right here. A keyframe is going to designate a change in properties for this object. So holding down again, to get my selection drop down here, I want to insert a keyframe. All right, so now I have a keyframe inserted, and you can tell it's a keyframe because it's a filled dot here. So if I change anything between this frame at frame 60 and this keyframe at frame 1, things are going to change quite a bit. Frame 60 is how I want it to end up, so I'm going to change frame 1 to be a little bit different. To do this, I'm going to use, once again, my gradient transform tool, and I want to actually adjust this gradient. I'm going to actually just kind of make it a little bit bigger, so wider, and it's going to go ahead and at frame 60, switch. So just a really subtle animation between these two frames. But what I need to do is actually create this as a shape tween, since I'm using a shape object. So to do that, I have to find my motion tweening settings. So right here above the timeline, I can by default create a classic tween. However, we want to create a shape tween between these two keyframes. So I'm going to click on that. And you'll notice down below, the frames get colored in, and we've got this little arrow here. And now if I actually go back and hit play, we can see it's really, really subtle, but it does shift between, the gradient shifts quite a bit. It goes from this really wide gradient to tightening up towards the end here. So again, very subtle, but it happens. All right, so that's done. We can lock down our background layer. And the next thing we want to do, probably most obvious, is dealing with our text and our image. So for both of these things, we need to actually encapsulate both of these into some other format. So we're going to create some symbols out of both of these objects before we create any more keyframes. So for my little phone here, selecting this, I'm going to choose to modify, convert to symbol. This brings up my convert to symbol dialog. I'm just going to name this symbol phone, and we can either have this as a movie clip symbol or a graphic symbol. Either one's going to be fine. I'm going to choose a movie clip symbol just because this gives us a little more flexibility in terms of interactivity and so forth if we ever want to make this clickable, and hit OK. All right, with that done, this can now be tweened using either a classic tween or a motion tween. So I'm going to go ahead for this one and right click, and we could choose create motion tween here. Or we could also, of course, choose any frame within this frame span. And over here, instead of a shape tween, choose create motion tween. There we go. So what we're going to do is actually go ahead and go towards the end here. Let's go to like frame 40. And I'm just going to move this actual symbol instance with my arrow keys, just over 1 pixel and then back 1 pixel. As you can see, this sets a little automated keyframe here. It's a little diamond, very similar to After Effects. And then going way back to the beginning keyframe, I'm going to select my object, my symbol instance, and we can see here with the object selected, this is a movie clip symbol instance of the symbol of phone. And if you look in the library, we have our symbol phone right here. We also have our actual bitmap image here as well. But phone as a movie clip symbol is what we want to pay attention to. So from here on frame 1, we can just click and drag to shift that over. And you can see the motion path here. If we hit play, there it goes. It's very linear right now, but it does provide animation for us. And at the same time, we want to go ahead and do the same thing to our text. So right now, our text is just a text object. You can see this here, static text. However, if we choose modify, convert to symbol, and we can make a movie clip symbol again. I'm just going to call this text and hit OK. So this is now a movie clip instance of text. So with it being a movie clip symbol instance, and I can of course lock down my image, make sure I don't modify that at all. What we're going to do is kind of fade this in from nothing. So on this initial keyframe here, I want to go ahead and inside of my color effects in the properties panel under object, choose alpha and bring that all the way down to 0 right here. There's a slider from 0 to 100%, bring it all the way to 0. And let's see, probably right here. I'm going to insert a number of keyframes. So the first one I'm going to insert is at frame 20 here. And this is going to be a keyframe, so insert keyframe. And then also at frame 50, I'll insert another keyframe. Between these two keyframes, I'm going to select anywhere and choose to create, in this case, a classic tween. A classic tween is different from a motion tween in that you need to set two specific manually selected keyframes to actually have the properties change between them. So as you see, nothing's actually changing right now. So if I go to frame 50, where my secondary keyframe is, and I click on the outline of my movie clip symbol instance, I can go ahead and modify my alpha properties once again up to 100. So now, between these two keyframes, we've got it going from completely opaque or completely transparent to completely opaque in the span of those frames. I can shift this down a little bit to make it a little easier to see. And with the real estate on this screen, it's a bit tough, but I'm going to pull that slider down so we can see everything going on here. So let's hit play. And there it goes. So of course you can click and shift to move these different keyframes around to get your timing just right. There we go. That's pretty good. And another thing you can do is actually change the easing properties of a lot of this stuff. So for instance, for my text, it's a very linear experience. Same thing with the phone here. Let's click on any of the frames between my two keyframes in my classic tween. And notice over here, we're using a classic ease. However, I can click on this and choose ease in, out, or ease in, out. I'm going to choose ease in. And then we have a number of different easing equations to choose from. I'll choose a simple sine. So it starts off a little slow and then ramps up. So let's double click to choose that and implement it. You can see this is now a sine ease in. And if we go back to the beginning and hit play, that's pretty good. So with that done, we can now export this as an animated GIF. To do that, choose File, Export, Export Animated GIF. This brings up, once again, our rather large export image dialog. I'm going to make that as small as I can. And basically, we're able to go ahead and export this as an animated GIF from here. Once we hit save, this will export as animated GIF. And right now, it's an unnamed item here. Unfortunately, you can't see what's down below, which down below has all the animation stuff. But it should be pretty easy to figure out. When you export the animated GIF, let's go ahead and actually save this. We can preview it as well. So I'm going to hit preview here. And what that's going to do is actually open it up in our web browser. And we can see a preview of the actual animated GIF. Hitting refresh in the browser is going to show us the animated ad. And we've got some additional information down here. But what you'll do is hit save, and this will save it as an animated GIF, which you can then upload or use in any way you like.